The passenger in seat 12B. A story of leadership, reckoning, and redemption at 38,000 feet. The wind whipped across the tarmac at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, brushing against a tall man in his late 50s standing alone in the terminal. The soft murmur of announcements echoed overhead as travelers bustled around him, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing behind his polished demeanor. Julian Barrett adjusted his glasses non-prescription purely for effect and looked calmly at the first-class lounge attendant who had just asked him to wait outside. Her name tag read S. Jennings, and her practiced smile didn't mask the disdain in her eyes. "Sir, if you wouldn't mind stepping outside while we verify your credentials," she said, tone sharp, voice controlled. Julian didn't argue. He didn't ask to speak with a manager. He nodded, offered a restrained of course, and walked out of the lounge like a man with nowhere particular to be. He took a seat near a charging station, pulled out a battered moleskine notebook, and began to write. He wrote not because he was idle, but because every moment of this trip had been calculated. This wasn't just a man on a flight. This was a man on a mission. What no one in that lounge knew what Sarah Jennings couldn't have imagined was that the man she'd just humiliated was the CEO of Skyline Airlines. Julian Barrett had founded Skyline nearly 30 years ago, building it from a 4-route regional carrier into one of the most respected names in air travel. He wasn't just the boss, she was the architect, the visionary, the builder of culture and principle. But something had shifted. Complaints were up, loyalty was down, and a disturbing trend had emerged. Minority customers, particularly black passengers, were reporting cold, dismissive service, unjustified delays, and suspiciously frequent security re-verifications. So Julian decided to find out for himself. He grew a beard, ditched his tailored suits for department store casuals, booked his flights under his middle-name Malcolm and flew economy like the rest of the world. No abras, no assistance, just him in a suitcase. On day 6 of his journey, he was back in Atlanta, waiting to board a flight to Los Angeles. What he'd seen so far had both angered and clarified him. This morning's incident in the lounge had pushed everything into focus. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was rot, systemic, subtle, and protected by plausible deniability. "Excuse me," a voice beside him said. Julian looked up to see an older black man taking the seat beside him. The man wore a threadbare but clean jacket, a Skyline diamond medallion tag hanging from his luggage. "They did the same thing to me last week," the man said with a wry smile. Julian raised an eyebrow. "The lounge?" "Yep. Same woman too. Jennings, right?" Julian closed his notebook. "Yes. I'm Calvin Miles. Pharmaceutical sales. Been flying Skyline since '06. Got more miles than some of their pilots." Julian chuckled. "Malcolm Turner. Retired professor. Well, Professor Turner, let me save you some time. You can have all the status in the world, but if you look like us, it won't matter to folks like her." Julian nodded slowly. "You ever file a complaint?" Calvin laughed, a humorless sound. "4 times. Got 4 automated emails thanking me for my feedback and promising to look into the matter. Never heard another word." Julian's pen returned to his notebook. "Anyway," Calvin continued, standing as his boarding group was called, "good luck with the lounge. And if you get in, don't hold your breath for decent service." Julian sat back, his mind whirring. That conversation had confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't about customer service anymore. It was about culture, about values being quietly abandoned beneath the weight of unchecked discretion and impunity. An hour later, Julian boarded his flight in the middle of Group 3, slipping into seat 12B, squeezed between a sleeping teenager and a woman already complaining about overhead space. A flight attendant passed Diane Walker, her face blank as she glanced at his boarding pass and moved on without a greeting. It wasn't until cruising altitude that Julian saw Diane again, off-duty and seated across the aisle in 14C. He noticed her phone screen light up. She was texting. The name T. Reed appeared. Julian's pulse spiked. Thomas Reed, Skyline's regional director of airport operations, brought in 18 months ago from a now-defunct rival carrier. Julian had heard whispers of tension following Reed's arrival-cut corners, efficiency mandates, rising attrition among customer service reps. Now, he watched as Diane typed. Reed says a black guy caused a scene at ATL Lounge. Watch for any trouble at LAX. A reply came seconds later. Standard protocol. You know the drill. Julian stared out the window, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. This wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't unconscious bias. It was coordinated, practiced, executed with precision under the veil of protocol. He landed in LA with renewed purpose. By the time he called Elaine Rivera Skyline's longtime COO and his most trusted ally, he had a dozen case notes, a folder of documented incidents, and a plan. Elaine listened in silence as he laid it all out. God, she whispered when he was finished. How deep does this go? I don't know yet, Julian replied. But I will. Over the next 5 days, Julian flew to Seattle, Phoenix, San Francisco, and Las Vegas. He boarded 10 flights, interacted with 78 employees, observed 24 instances of possible bias and 3 of genuine, unwavering professionalism. He noted every detail. When he returned to Atlanta, he walked in the Skyline boardroom not as Malcolm Turner, passenger, but as Julian Barrett, CEO. The board was shocked, some skeptical, others furious. You mean to tell us, one board member scoffed, that you've been gallivanting around in coach for 2 weeks pretending to be some kind of spy? I've been doing what none of you have, Julian replied. I've been listening, watching, and what I saw was unacceptable. He laid out the evidence. Shared stories. Read excerpts from passenger statements. Played audio recordings. Pointed out inconsistencies in upgrade algorithms, boarding policies, and lounge access. Then he dropped the bombshell. Diane Walker, Sarah Jennings, and Thomas Reed were at the center of it. And worse, Reed was part of a shadow campaign dating back to a failed takeover bid by Eastern Continental. The goal? Devalue Skyline's reputation from the inside to make it easier to acquire. It was corporate espionage dressed in discrimination. The room fell into stunned silence. Julian didn't ask for permission. He declared, I'm firing 17 employees. Effective immediately. Legal is prepared. HR is briefed. And after this meeting, I'm holding a company-wide broadcast. I'm telling our staff the truth. The next morning, Julian stood before a camera in Skyline's headquarters, speaking to 24,000 employees across the world. I built this company on the principle that every person matters, he said. I will not tolerate discrimination in any form. I will not stand by while the dignity of our passengers is compromised. And I will never be silent in the face of injustice, even if that injustice wears a Skyline uniform. The ripple effect was immediate. Some employees resigned. Others wrote to thank him. Passengers shared stories. Stock prices wobbled, then climbed. Civil rights groups applauded his transparency. Journalists hailed him as a rare example of ethical leadership. And through it all, Julian made calls to the quiet heroes like James Rivera and Emily Collins, employees who had upheld Skyline's values, even when their peers did not. To Calvin Miles, offering him a seat on the newly created Passenger Advisory Council. To regulators and federal investigators, turning over evidence of Eastern Continental's sabotage campaign. 5 years later, Julian Barrett stood in Skyline's Atlanta terminal, now a retired executive and honorary chairman. His successor, Zoe Carter, once a junior flight attendant, now a Wharton MBA and the company's first black woman, stood beside him. Together, they watched as a young black father walked through the first-class lounge doors, greeted warmly, treated with dignity. No one stopped him. No one asked him to wait outside. Julian smiled. That was the company he'd always dreamed of building. And now, at last, it had taken flight.